Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, pronouns he, him, and I direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into discussion of Marie Rutkoski's new book, Real Easy, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after over 94 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, booksellers, and authors like Marie and Andrea, we wouldn't be here today. And we are so truly appreciative of all of you. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us Marie Rutkoski for the launch of her new book, Real Easy. Born in Illinois, Marie is a graduate of the University of Iowa and Harvard University. She's a professor of English literature at Brooklyn College and a New York Times bestselling author of books for children and young adults. She lives in Brooklyn with her family. Joining Marie in conversation is Andrea Bartz. Andrea is a Brooklyn-based journalist and the New York Times bestselling author of We Were Never Here, The Lost Night, and The Herd. Her work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Marie Claire, Vogue, and many other outlets, and she's held editorial positions at Glamour, Psychology, Today, and Self, among other publications. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Marie and Andrea to the stage.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm so honored that Marie asked me to talk to her on her launch day about this book because I absolutely loved it, and I know you're going to as well. So for everyone who hasn't already pre-ordered it, jump on it. This book is pacey, it's tense, it's twisty, it's also character driven, and it's just so beautifully written. So I'm sure at some point the link to order it from the Strand is going to be dropped into the chat, and I just absolutely cannot recommend it enough, first of all. So turning it over to Marie, huge congratulations on your launch day.
Thank you so much. And thank you for saying such kind things about my book. It means the world to me because I just adored We Were Never Here. It was so. I know that I told you this when we first met that I found it like a fun thriller, but it really was. And I thought like, why is it so fun when kind of some like dark and twisty things happen in it? And I realized it's just such a pleasure. Like it's fun because it's such a pleasure to get to know these characters and to see their relationship and the different paths that it takes.
Yeah, well, thank you. I definitely can say all of the same about you, and this book in particular, which I just adored. So to kick us off, like, can you just tell us a little bit about the story about Real Easy and kind of where the idea came from?
Yeah, thank you. So Real Easy is it's a crime slash thriller story that's set in 1999 in Illinois at a strip club. And it's the story of what happens when one dancer is murdered, another goes missing, and a third tries to get to the bottom of what happened. And you know, along the way, you meet a fairly large cast of characters. You get the points of view of dancers, their children, bouncers, the club owner, the killer, the detectives. You know, it's kind of a wide-ranging or kaleidoscopic view of the story. And the idea came from my own experience working at a strip club about 20 years ago. The summer in two different places, two different cities and states. The summer after college, and then during my first year of graduate school. And it was an experience that not everyone has. And it was something that I wanted to write about in some way. And so when I thought, well, what would I have to say about it, or what kind of story could I tell? Two memories came to mind, and one was of me being backstage and getting my makeup done, and hearing one of the dancers say to the other that a woman had been found dead by the side of the road, and that she had been ID'd by her breast implants, because breast implants have serial numbers. And so, it's possible to trace, who owns those implants, even if you can't really identify the body based on the body. And I heard that and I just thought, oh, I cannot hear that. That is something I don't want to know any more about. It's something I don't want to know that it's true, because I thought, if it is true, maybe I shouldn't be working here. and I just felt at the time that I had to keep working there. And so there's that memory, and then there was a second, and it was of what happened when one night, one of the dancers was high, and she was a very responsible dancer, and not that nobody thought that she was getting high on the job deliberately. We all thought that someone had put a drug in her drink, which can happen. It's not necessarily common, but it can happen that a customer thinks it's fun to drug a girl, or a customer thinks maybe he can convince her to leave the club and go home with him. We didn't know the situation, but we did know that she was incapacitated and that she really needed to be driven home. And I felt the impulse to drive her home. But I will admit, felt afraid to do so, in part because of that earlier story I'd heard about the dead woman. Um, and in part because it was 1999. I had a very basic cell phone. I suck at directions. I, can't navigate to save my life. And the woman would not have been able to help me drive her home. I would have really had to figure it out in the dark at 3 a.m. in an area that I didn't know particularly well. And I did not step forward. Someone else did. Someone else drove her home. She was totally fine. This is not a scary or sad story. Everybody is okay. um, but I did think, well, what if it hadn't gone well? Like, what if something bad had happened? And so those two moments came together to form the plot of this book.
Yeah. Yeah, those are definitely, elements that happen kind of wholesale early on in the book and kick off this much more tragic, dark, and twisted story from there. And I love what you said about this being sort of a kaleidoscopic book, because you drop into the head of so many different characters, and you really get a sense of their distinct personalities. Like being in that backstage with this, at the club, you really can feel the zinging and the people making jokes and different personalities coming out in these big sort of scenes. And then you really learn a lot about the backstories of other characters, even including some more minor ones who kind of have their moments of stepping into the spotlight and contributing their one story. So I'm curious how you decided what made you want to tell the story in that way, in sort of a non-traditional, way of non-traditional narrative like that. And then also, how did you go about really developing these characters and giving them backstories and sort of seamlessly? I was just really blown away by how many well-wrought, developed characters were stuffed into it.
Oh, thank you. I I think that I really wanted to represent the culture of the club, and I think I would have done a disservice to myself, to the women who work at clubs like that, um, and just to the story, if I hadn't represented the diversity at the club, like all different kinds of women with different backgrounds, different life experiences, women who had day jobs, women who were in school, women who had kids, um, and like, people from other countries. It just was a very, like, the kaleidoscope existed at the club already. If you think about like all the different kinds of women. Um, and then there are other players at the club too, like the house mom and the bouncers and the DJ. And so I just felt like to represent the club, I had to have a lot of characters. And then I wanted to give them all my attention
Mhm.
because I really think that even secondary characters should be rich and interesting. I do think of this book as having three main characters. The detective Holly, who is the lead on this case, Samantha, the dancer who goes missing, and then Georgia, another dancer who is kind of roped into the investigation, and then kind of investigates on her own. It starts by helping out, and then thinks, "No, I want to solve this."
Yeah.
Uh, so those are the three main characters, but I just wanted to um, give life to, I guess, the world of the club, and by doing so, I had to, I guess, present well-rounded characters, even if they were secondary.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you definitely succeeded in my book. Are you in touch with anyone from when you were working as a stripper in Illinois? Like, do they know this book exists? Is that a part of your life in any way other than writing this book?
So I didn't work in Illinois actually, but I am still in touch with one other woman.
Mhm.
The others, I've lost touch. Um, we haven't spoken in a long time. Um, it was also so long ago, and I think that
Right.
the nature of working at the club is that it's pretty transitory.
Yeah.
Like women will come in, they might work for some women are actually kind of touring around the country.
Oh,
So they might, come in and stay for a month and then go to another city. Part of why they have that job is because they like to travel.
yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
like being in place. And then sometimes women just don't come to work again and you have no idea why. So I am still really good friends with one woman, and she read the draft and gave feedback and was really helpful.
That's amazing. Were you at the time kind of thinking like this is interesting fodder, or were you keeping like journals or notes, or how did it was it just sitting in your mind and eventually came out on the page?
Um, I mean, I did think about the fact that it could one day be good to write about,
Yeah.
um, but I didn't. I actually didn't take that many notes.
Okay.
I did. I mean, there's certainly moments that I remember, but I didn't really note a lot down. What about
Yeah.
you? I mean, like like we were talking earlier. Oh, I see your cat. Sorry, I just texted in Strand.
Wandering in.
We were talking earlier about like travel in your books and like a sense of place and building setting and like turning place into its own character. And
Yeah.
I was just, thinking about how wonderfully you wrote Chile and also, is it Phnom Penh? Um,
Yeah, Cambodia.
yeah. And so, but then also Wisconsin, like when Emily comes back home to Wisconsin, like you just have such an amazing sense of place. And I wonder if it's because you love to travel or you're really attached to your home of Wisconsin. Like what is it about place
Yeah.
and travel?
I didn't really think about it, but we both kind of wrote Midwestern thrillers this time around, which is pretty fun. But thank you so much for those kind words. I mean, I worked as a travel writer in addition to writing books for a few years, and travel is just a passion of mine. And I feel like there's this sort of symbiotic relationship where traveling, it feeds me so much and it gives me so much inspiration. And like I wanted, it's actually not a symbiotic, more of a cycle. It made me want to capture what's so special about travel and like convey that even to those who aren't there, which I was hopefully kind of doing in travel writing. But I really wanted to put into a book and just capture sort of that liminal space, that specialness of being on a trip, being on this trip of a lifetime, and everything has this specialness because it might not happen again. And I just I don't really take notes while I'm traveling, but it was pretty fun for me to step back into these places I'd actually visited, Chile and Cambodia, and just immerse myself again by writing about it and picking out the details that stick out in my memory, which I imagine is sort of a similar process, even though there's a 20-year gap for you of capturing the club, which you do so magnificently as well. Like I felt like I was there while reading it. So yeah, I think we both kind of write setting as a character in a certain way. And it's like, this couldn't be wholesale lifted up, and the story couldn't just be lifted up and airdropped into another setting. Like that setting is really sort of the crucible of all of the drama going on. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I'm also interested in just in our books as Midwestern books because it's hard to think of. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm blanking at the moment. But like Celeste Ng, her book Little Fires Everywhere takes place in the Midwest, and but it's hard for me to conjure up many books that are set like in the Midwest and really focus on that as a kind of special place.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I don't know, I think a lot of writers come from the Midwest, but then we leave and then they settle in New York, or they settle in, I don't know, San Francisco or Maine. Why does Maine have so many writers? And then they're setting their stories there. And I think being from the Midwest almost gives you um, this sort of like effortless superpower of reading a room, of communicating without things being spoken, of sort of picking up on subtext, of observing other people and sort of jumping into their mind in terms of what might they need, what am I doing that could elicit, a good or bad response. And that's just, it's an unspoken given, and people who aren't from the Midwest will never quite get it. But I think it really lends itself to fiction, especially really character-driven fiction, which is what both of us write, or psychological fiction, because we spend a lot of time thinking about what people are thinking and feeling and why, and what's said and what's not said, and it's sort of like behind this like very Midwestern nice veneer. There's a lot going on. We are like masters of the secrets and the unsaid. And I think that definitely comes through in your book as well. It'd be a very different book if it were set in New York City in 1999, if it were set in Vegas. So I don't know, what do you think? What is it about the Midwest that was drawing us both to it?
I mean, you express it so well. Like just the way in which in the Midwest, we're people. Like we're really interested, I think, in what's going on in people's lives. But we're also like we try to be nice and we mean to be nice.
Mhm.
But also like we're good at, I think, um, at keeping up a nice veneer while we have other thoughts behind it.
Yeah.
And it is a culture, and one that I really love and miss sometimes. I mean, I think part of what made me write real easy was the nostalgia um, for Illinois.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, part of the pleasure of reading your book and dropping into all these different minds is that we, the reader, are dealing with this like delicious irony of um, knowing things that characters aren't expressing. And so then as we move from one character's point of view to another, like we have this dramatic irony. We know like what they're actually thinking, but they're not expressing it because everyone's acting Midwestern. I mean, with the exception of the killer being obviously not a good guy, like everyone is acting very Midwestern. And it's just very fun to watch the narrative and watch the mystery move forward and come together when we do have these different puzzle pieces that we're putting together. It makes the reader very involved. And we're kind of playing detective ourselves. And I'm curious how um, murder mysteries are so hard. There's so many moving parts. And then you added this additional element of like full backstories about all of these different characters and so many points of view. How did you sort of figure out the mechanics of the murder mystery? How'd you make that
Um,
happen? Because it's very impressive.
Thank you. Oh my God. I wish I could give you a really clear answer, but it's true. It's really hard. I mean, I think part of what helped was that I wanted to make sure that whenever I was in a character's point of view, it wasn't gratuitous in terms of the plot of the book. That because I like plotty books. You know, I didn't want to just write a book about character and have no story to it. I wanted, you know, the reader to keep turning the pages to find out what happened. And so, and I knew that I know that when readers really like a character, it's hard sometimes to ask them to switch to another one. Like I feel that as a reader.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to tend to that. And one way of tending to that was by offering good characters, right? So that if you're switching from Holly to Georgia, you might think, oh, I'm happy to be back in Georgia's head. Actually, I miss Georgia. But also, I wanted to make sure that in every chapter, because the chapters are allocated to one point of view. So one chapter is Samantha's, and then one is Victor's, one is Georgia's, etc.'s. And so if you are in that character's point of view, you are there to learn something about the plot. Like there is a piece of information that you didn't have before. And so I design it in my head as with each chapter, I'm giving out at least one, maybe more bits of information. So it's really the reader who has the most knowledge, more than any of the characters, more than the detectives, more than the dancers, even more than the killer, because the killer doesn't know what the detectives are thinking, and we do. So I guess that because I started with that plan, that each chapter had to have a special clue or piece, a puzzle, or a new way of seeing old evidence, I guess that kept the story going. So it's kind of like stringing beads on a necklace.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about, like, when you were writing We Were Never Here, were you surprised by any of the many twists your book takes?
Yeah.
Anything you didn't plan?
Well, I'm one of those crazy thriller writers that for some reason can't write with an outline. I'm a full-on pantser. So I start with the hook. I start with the central question, and I might have some sense of what's going to happen around the midpoint, but not always, or it could change. And I just discover it by writing. And so I have a word count goal every day, and sometimes nothing productive comes out of it, but a lot of the time, like while I'm actually in the scene, I'm sort of surprised by what a character says or does, or someone will do something intriguing. Somebody hands something to someone that I didn't expect. And it's fun because for me as a writer, I'm sort of in it with the reader of like having that gasp moment when something unexpected happens, but it's also just a chaotic way to write a book, and to, spend the entire writing process in fear that I won't be able to land all of the airplanes that I have flung up into the air. So I mean, this one's not a traditional whodunit, but there's a mystery element to all of my books, and I have not known whodunit until I got to that. And so inevitably there's a period where I'm like, this is the book I can't finish. I don't know how it's going to end. I'm going to have to just give the advance back and not write it. Which thankfully hasn't happened yet. But are you a full-on outliner? Like, did you know the whole thing before you started writing?
No, I mean, I knew who did it, but I didn't know. There's so much else I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are definitely some red herrings in the plot, and those were ones that I discovered along the way of writing the book. I'm a pantser too. I think because I want to be able to read the book as I'm writing it, and I want to be surprised too. And then you can always reverse engineer it. Like once you discover something, you just realize, oh, I'll have to go back and string that in somewhere.
Yeah. There's always the going back, and there's layering new stuff in and seeding things. But also for me, there's a lot of trimming and pruning, where at the beginning I'm just sort of giving way too many details or things that could later become relevant, and just sort of like pulling pins out of grenades and strewing them about. And then once it comes time to start, picking up threads you've introduced, a lot of that original stuff ends up not being even useful. So I have to go back and I gave her glasses and really bad eyesight, and that didn't actually pan out. So we don't need that anymore. Like stuff that I thought might go somewhere that went absolutely nowhere. I'm curious, how did you actually go about developing these characters? Like, do you do character sketches of them? Do you kind of spend time free writing about them before they're on the page, or are you just learning about them kind of as you go?
I guess it's a bit of both. There was one. It's funny because this is my adult debut, but I write YA as well, and most of my books have been YA or children's books. And I've mostly written books that have some kind of romantic element. And this book, you would think, no romance in this one. This is a strip club. There's a serial killer. Um, it's a crime novel. Where could you fit in romance? And yet, I somehow did. I wasn't even planning on it.
Oh, Marie, I love that. That was one of my favorite things.
Oh, thank you. It was one of mine too, and it was just that I had this. I don't want to spoil anything, but that relationship, the development of that, came as a surprise to me, and that was something that grew out of just, I think, developing the characters.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't think that fully answers your question, but
Well, yeah, it sounds like you're kind of learning about, they're sort of presenting themselves to you as you're writing, and the world is sort of filling in around you.
I also just, as a reader, I love character-driven crime novels and
Mhm.
mysteries. I love Tana French. I love Kate Atkinson's Jackson Brody books. I think that, you know, there's this, I think, an interesting question in the air about thrillers and crime, which is, why do people like them? Because they're bad things happen in them, and
Right.
hopefully the bad guy gets caught, and you figure out this mystery. And I just realized that there's also kind of a cozy pleasure in just not looking at this world and kind of observing it, but also not being in it. You're not the detective who has to solve the crime. You don't have to do that work. You can just watch it happen. And I think there is something delightfully cozy about, say, getting into bed with a Tana French book,
Right.
even though dark things happen in those books, or The Secret History by Donna Tartt. That's a, that book goes some places, and yet it's so pleasurable.
Right. Well, it's interesting because when you were talking about the origin story for this, it sort of grew out of these real life moments of your brain reacting with fear, right? And having this fear response of this what if, and this responding to very real life information. And I think that's definitely true of my books as well, where I'm kind of writing these books to explore things that I genuinely fear. And it's sort of how I deal with my own fear of, especially in We Were Never Here, and definitely in Real Easy, that we're sort of trafficking in this idea of male violence and violence against women's bodies, and um, sort of just the casual expected nature in a certain way of violence against women, which it's crazy we even call it violence against women. It's male violence. And certainly in the world of your book, these women work at a strip club, well, strippers, I'm sure there was some, well, you should tell me, but I would imagine there's some sort of misogynistic, well, they're strippers, they're asking for it. They're this certain, I don't know, perspective on it that I think is kind of echoed with We Were Never Here. I had the idea because people kept saying oh, like you travel to those places by yourself, or like I wouldn't want to go there, or like you need to do this, this, and this, and this so that you don't get attacked. Like here are all the ways that it's basically your fault if something bad happens while you're traveling, and you should be afraid and you should be worried. And so I feel like we were both kind of in different ways wrestling with that topic of like of asking for it and violence against women. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is so interesting, and I'm also thinking about the people who said those things to you, and about how there's something else going on, which is when they're expressing that, they're also uncomfortable about the place you're going to. Like
Mhm.
they have some kind of stigma, like they're creating some kind of stigma about
Right.
where you're traveling to, which is, really problematic, and I think shows like the questioner's own, I guess, like inexperience with those places, or maybe
Mhm.
that they're not thinking they're just places with people in them, like
Mhm.
people like us. And I think that something similar can happen with the club, which is that like it's really easy to look at a club and see, you can walk in, you can see a bunch of naked women on stage, and you can think, oh, like those are like blow up dolls, or like those aren't people. I think I as much as I really like Billie Eilish's music, I do know that she said something that had a really there was a kind of strong negative response in like the sex workers community, because she said that the bodies of women in porn were not real, and then women who actually work in that industry, and I'm not familiar with that industry myself, but they said, but we have those bodies. Those are our bodies. Like they are real and we are real. And so I think that there is something similar happening when people would say, like, how could you go there? Aren't you worried? And it's because they're not really seeing it as like a home to somebody, or as a place where people work, or as a place where people have neighbors. They're seeing it as alien. And I think something similar happens when people can look at a club where they don't think about the women as actual people who have families and lives, and, like dreams and backgrounds and regrets. And they might have similar thoughts about people who come to the club and think, oh, like what losers who go to the club, and they might not be thinking these are some lonely people.
Mhm.
Like I just think that it's really easy um, to judge and then like throw up this distance.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think people are just doing it out of their own fear and their own, desire to sort of protect themselves and tell themselves, well, I could never be in danger because I'm not putting myself in this kind of danger. Like that's something other people do. And I've had people say, I think this is maybe the most telling. They'll say, well, I would never want to go there, or I would never want my wife to go there, or I wouldn't want my daughter to go there.
Right.
And it's just so interesting. It's in the context of me either saying I'm about to go there or I have just gone there. It's always about a country that I just brought up, probably to talk about how much I loved it and often how safe I felt and how much safer there than in much of America. But I think it's really telling that it's people's way of regaining control over a fairly, out of control world where we can't always protect ourselves or be in charge of our own personal safety. um, and it makes me wonder too, like what are you hoping that readers take away from the book? Like what did you kind of come into it with a goal of um, changing perspectives or certain themes that you really wanted to have come through?
I mean, I think I began by wanting to, I guess, destigmatize that kind of work. And then, and I kept that goal throughout, but there was another goal that I didn't realize that I had until the end. And um, it was to invite the reader to think about goodness, maybe we're going back earlier to that conversation about being Midwestern, like the importance of being nice, but also which is different than the importance of being good. Like Samantha offers to drive Jolene home, and that is an act of goodness. Um, it's one that leads to some, some like threatening consequences, but it is still a beautiful thing. Like it's beautiful when I think when we offer ourselves to each other and when we, have acts of goodness. And I think that I wanted, by the end of the book, I hope that readers will see this as ultimately a hopeful story about the ways that we risk ourselves for others.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautifully put. Yeah. And definitely something that I took away from it. And there's just so many instances of it in the book, sort of echoed in different ways that are coming to mind, just between detectives, between lots of different interactions where that sort of message comes through. Yeah, I really loved that.
You know, while we're talking about relationships, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about female friendships, because I feel like that's a pretty common theme in both our books, like the ways in which women develop relationships with each other. And I wondered I don't know, what you maybe wanted to, like what you were thinking about friendships between women, or what you maybe wanted to say about it in your book.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I had the idea for We Were Never Here, which is set initially in Chile, where these two backpacking best friends have met up there from opposite corners of the globe. They take a big trip every year, and they end up, one of them is attacked and they kill a backpacker in self-defense. That's like how the book starts, for those who aren't familiar. And I had the idea for it while I was in Chile's Elqui Valley, with a very close friend who lives in Australia. And before the pandemic, we did meet up every year somewhere fantastic and have this really amazing trip together. And so initially I wanted to just capture that, I don't know, capture the beauty of their relationship and how they're the kind of friends who can, pick up like nothing has happened, like right where they left off. They both understand the specialness of this experience they're having. They know this is once in a lifetime, and it just gives this special sparkle and shine to every moment and every interaction. And so I wanted to start with this really beautiful thing that I felt I'd experienced firsthand, and then turn it on its head and kind of say what happens when that turns terrifying, which ultimately was a way for me to explore, like we were saying, the sort of default violence that we expect to flow toward women. And I kind of thought, well, what would happen if we reverse the direction and instead it's women inflicting violence on a man? But once I'd gotten that far, I needed these two characters to have more going on in their relationship so that this could be a psychological thriller and heavily about the two of them, and not just, other people could do it, but I do not have the capability of doing like a pure cat and mouse procedural, just about them, ditching this body and trying to get away and the walls closing in. That's part of it, but I knew that this really needed to be character driven. And so that was when I just started sort of distinguishing between these two women and developing their personalities. And, what kind of came out was that Emily, our narrator, was a little bit more of the laid back one, a little bit less controlling, a little bit less, I shouldn't say controlling, I should say take charge. And Kristen, the other woman, is much more, the loud one, the one who steps up, the one who will do absolutely anything to keep, Emily safe. She'll do anything for Emily's sake. And so I wanted this relationship to both feel believable in the love that they have for each other, but also off, because we're in the world of thrillers and there's got to be some creepiness and some secrets and some stuff from the past. And relationships are just where all of like the juicy darkness really comes out. So that was sort of the approach, but I think people, occasionally a reader will just be like, oh, this is, Kristen was such a psycho, or their friendship was so messed up. And I feel like that's a little bit missing the point, because like I think I find it believable that these women would like really adore each other and really be that close from the start. And like that makes it hard to see other things about people, you know, someone that you trust, someone that you've relied on, someone that you are now trauma bonded with because of this horrible experience. So that was kind of my approach. But I would love to hear, I mean, same question to you in Real Easy, like how did you go about thinking about these female friendships, especially since, as I said, you have these like big kind of party scenes of a lot of women together in different ways, and then there's within that alliances and smaller friendships and just other things developing. Like, how did you go about just creating this amazing, intricate web of friendships and relationships between women?
Well, I think that part of it is just that I'm interested in friendships. But also, again, I think that having had the experience of working at a club and just seeing how like women can be competitors, they can be allies, they can team up, they can have strategies for how they're going to make the most money. Like there were, there were a couple dancers that I would dance with. If like sometimes someone would say, we would like two, we would like three, and then like who do you choose? Like there's this like I just think that and because not every night is the same and not everyone is working the same shift. Like it's I think I want to return to the word kaleidoscopic again because like when you're looking through a kaleidoscope, you might have the same pieces, but they're falling into place in different ways, and sometimes not all the pieces might be seen. And so I think that that was something that I experienced and
Yeah.
found fun to show. Also, like backstage can be really fun. Like everyone likes the behind the scenes. And it can be fun to actually to be behind the scenes and to like hear like women talking about the customers or
Yeah.
about the owner, about the DJ, about like where they're gonna go that night, about like their jealous boyfriend. Like there's a lot of gossip that's happening too, um, and I think that sometimes in that context, women say things to each other that they wouldn't in like quote unquote real life, because of course like backstage at a strip club is as much real life as what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think there's something about that context that might bring out a kind of truthfulness
Mhm.
um, to women that they're not going to have in like in office.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, yeah, it's really interesting because like we all, for the most part, are familiar with workplace drama,
Yeah.
right? And like that, just the alliances, the friendships, the jealousy, the backstabbing, the competition, like we have all experienced it in different ways, but there's something unique about this setting that I imagine sort of there's almost like this heightened intimacy, right? Because of the nature of it, because of yeah, I mean, if a customer is ordering two or three, like that is such a, I don't know, unique way to have to work with your coworkers. And there just has to be so much, I would imagine, like trust and just different, it's sort of asking different things of you than like someone's, boring desk job and, the water cooler and break room. Like there's a real intimacy to being behind the scenes there.
That is true. Though it can also be very boring.
Mhm.
Like definitely boredom is still part of the job. But it is interesting to me that it wasn't until I finished the draft that I realized, oh, I wrote a workplace drama. Like
Yeah.
this is a thriller, but it's also workplace drama.
Yeah, it totally is. Well, I am going to ask you one more question and then we're going to dive into these Q&As. And for everyone who's here, I see we already have 7 questions. We'll jump in, but if you have a question, don't drop it into chat, drop it into Q&A so that we can keep an eye on it. But the thing I want to make sure gets asked is just what's next for you.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, think that the next book, I think that the next book that I'm writing will be for adults. Um, I do love YA and children's and would like to write more in that field, but I think the next one is for adults. But it's too inchoate an idea at the moment to really talk about.
All right, all right. We'll eagerly await it. All right, I'm going to jump in then to a question from Gemma. Were there myths or stereotypes about strippers you wanted to dispel?
Yes. I mean, I think, I guess, well, maybe I want to ask, and the questioner doesn't necessarily have to jump in, but like what kinds of myths you think there are? Like what kinds of myths are we talking about? I mean, maybe, one would be that they're like money hungry, like lust for money. Like, why else would they be doing this job? But, like, we live in a capitalist society that is also, has a particular cultural view about women. And so if you're in a situation where you want to make a lot of money quickly, like, how are you going to do it? This is one way that society offers. And it's because society is built the way that it is.
Yeah.
And I think, like, what does it mean to be money hungry? Like, why isn't a lawyer money hungry? I mean, maybe a lawyer is, but like no one says, how could you do that job? Like, how could you be an accountant? Like, what a like there's the judgment doesn't come with it, even though,
Yeah.
like, I think we all recognize that money's a pretty powerful thing in our lives
Yeah.
and can do a lot, for not just us, but the people we love. I mean, I think that one of the things that was important to me about writing this book is to show that, like, the women who are working on the club are doing it for themselves, sometimes for their children, sometimes because that's the best choice they have available to them. Um, so, I mean, I guess it's just one stereotype that it's like it's all about the Benjamins. Well, yes, it is, but like, what isn't? Like,
Right.
is an investment banker not all about the Benjamins?
Right.
I think he is, and usually he is a he.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. I love that. Nick asks, which of the three main characters was your favorite to inhabit?
Um, I think Georgia, probably Georgia, because I mean, Holly is. I think if you like Mayor of Easttown, you might be interested in this book because the detective. I mean, I wrote it before I saw Mayor of Easttown, but definitely noticed some parallels. Um, and the lead detective, Holly Malin, is struggling with a tragedy in her past, much like Mare is in that show. Um, and so, writing from her point of view was just a little harder in an emotional way. And Samantha, uh, I think what was pleasurable about writing from her perspective was writing about her love for her boyfriend's daughter. I mean,
Yeah.
she is in a relationship that is not so great. I think that that is apparent to anybody who reads the first chapter. Like, her boyfriend, Nick, like, if we wrote into the Reddit, am I the asshole, about, like, Nick, I think we would know clearly that he is one. He would be he would be YTA, I guess is how people respond on the Reddit. Like, you're the asshole. I also have to kind of like make sure I actually say the word because I read those sometimes with my kids and we call it am I the a-hole? Like sanitized for the boys. Anyway, so she stays in this not great relationship, but there's a good reason for it, and that is that she loves his daughter and she can't have children of her own. And so I think writing that relationship was really pleasurable. That was my favorite part about writing her. And I think my favorite part about writing Georgia is that I mean, this is kind of spoilery. Um, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will say she has an opportunity to get out of a life that she's not happy with. And I think that there is something really exciting about someone just like saying to themselves, I want something more and
Yeah.
I'm going to get it. And whether or not that works out, like that can be that's where the tension lies in a book, but it's also really fun to write.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's fun to read. We love to root for those people. Um, Lorraine asks, for both, what draws you to writing thrillers?
Um, this is the first thriller I've written. And I think that for me, part of it was like the puzzle part of it. I really like puzzles. I know this is really dorky, and like old maybe of me, but I shouldn't say that. That's wrong. But I love putting a puzzle together. I love it. Like I love like just being before a fire and having all the pieces out on the table. It's so relaxing. Glass of wine. Um, and so like there is something puzzle piecey about a thriller. What about you? What do you like about it?
Yeah, I think it's two things. I love the puzzle element. I mean, with We Were Never Here, there's even a whole section that's like a scavenger hunt with like clues and like decoding things, and
Yeah,
I kind of
I
went
love
full
that.
hog on that. So I love the puzzle element, even though I hate it when I'm stuck in the middle and don't know the answer yet. But I think also what we were saying before about kind of exploring our own fears, through writing and sort of playing things out, and yet being able to do it in a safe way that feels kind of cozy. So I think for me, it's sort of a way of wrestling with, topics that I'm scared of or that I don't totally know how I feel about. And I wrestle with them on the page. And that's somehow satisfying and hopefully fun to read.
Definitely, definitely. I love the puzzle, like the scavenger hunt. That was amazing.
Thank you. I started it as just like a way I had my word count and I was like, well, this sounds like a fun thing to do and we'll take up a few hundred words. And then I had to figure out how to make it like play into the plot. But all right, we'll move quickly as we get close to 8 o'clock. Anonymous attendee says, why do you think we're drawn to stories and shows about violence against women as a source of entertainment? Oh, I have some thoughts on this, but I'll let you go first.
Okay, so I'm going to quote someone who knows way more about this than I do, and that is Judith Butler, who has written so much about philosophy and gender. And Butler was interviewed by the New York Times maybe a couple of years ago. And what Butler said about male violence towards women, including trans women, is that it is a way of defining the femininity of the victim and of defining femininity as as being vulnerable to the risk of male violence. Like in a way, it's saying this is what womanhood is. Like it is that you are vulnerable to what I, a man, can do to you. And I just read that and I thought, oh my god, like it was a scary thing to read, but it also rang very true. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that would be Butler's answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. I had not heard that before. But yeah, for me, I think it relates to what I was just saying about exploring my own fears. I mean, the world is a freaking scary place for women for a lot of reasons. Where many women are killed for rejecting a man, just not wanting, not saying no to his advances, simple things like that. And so I think reading, in our cases, writing about and also reading about stories that do involve this is sort of a way of like taking back some power, and I don't know, exploring the reality of a world where women are generally the victims of violence. And I don't know, like there's a contest, I can't think of what it's called, but there's a contest for books in which no woman is assaulted, murdered, something like she's not a victim, because it was sort of like, we're just using this as entertainment and it's gratuitous. And I'm sure there's really amazing books that win it, and that's cool. But like, the world isn't like that. We don't live in a world where women are not assaulted, or we are more likely to be victims in a lot of these cases. So I think it's just reflective of the world we live in a way of safely exploring those fears, instead of just taking in that, like, you shouldn't travel the world, like, if you strip, you're asking for it, and sort of that misogynistic messaging.
Yeah, I mean, I think that and the more hopeful side, or the more hopeful side of the coin of this kind of violence or fear, or this vulnerability towards violence, is how do you, I think this is what you were saying earlier, how do you as a woman find agency?
Mhm.
How do you say, I am going to travel the world, I know there's a risk, I'm going to take it anyway.
Yeah.
And how that can bring you joy, as it did with you and your friend in Australia. I think there is a kind of triumph that Georgia gets by uncovering some of the secrets of the club, and of who this person, this murderer, could be.
Mhm.
And I think that's important to Holly too. There is a seeking agency in an unsafe world is real.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thank you for bringing the hopeful into it, not just the fire. Um, Andrea Roberts asks, was it difficult moving from fantasy to a thriller book?
Well, no, because I think you're world building all the time. I mean, I think that with the thriller, at least the kind of thriller I wrote, it's populated by a lot of characters. There's the world of the police station and the detectives, as well as the world of the club. My brother is a detective, sorry, he's a police officer, a patrol officer, and my sister-in-law is a detective. And so I did a lot of interviews with them, as well as with someone in a Manhattan precinct, and talked with an accident reconstructionist, with other detectives at my brother's um, headquarters. And it was part of the pleasure of writing this book was also just discovering that world and representing it
Yeah.
on the page. So I do think that world building happens whether you're writing fantasy or a thriller.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Kind of a related question from Mariana Bear. Were the challenges of writing an adult novel different from writing YA or middle grade?
Um, well, I yes, yes, they were different, but made a lot easier because Mariana is a beloved member of my writing group, and so she was able to give me lots of feedback on what worked and what didn't, and I'm really grateful to her, and to Andrea for coming, and to all of you for showing up. And so I just, yeah, I mean, definitely Real Easy is not a book for kids. I mean, it's not for adolescents. It's not for children. Um, and so, and there is, I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer that question, and I'm sorry, but I think what I mean to say is that um, there are no limits to what you can write about for adults, and there are for young adults, or at least I feel that there are. There is some censorship, some self-censoring that happens when I write for young readers, and I personally feel that for me there should be, but for adults it's a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. No bets are off. Our final question is from Chris Pavoni. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Thanks for coming. And he's a question for both of you. How much do you want readers to be able to figure out the puzzle, or do you want the final resolution to come as a head-spinning surprise? Great question. I would ask you as well, Chris, but we'll let Marie take this.
Uh, I mean, I want to write a book in such a way that it doesn't matter if you already know or if you don't know. You take pleasure. Like either you think, I know who did it. How can these characters not see it? I have to see this person unmasked. And you're kind of screaming at the characters in your head the whole way through because you're feeling that dramatic irony of, I know it. And how can you not see? Like there's a kind of tension and pleasure in that. As there is in being like having your mind blown and thinking, I did not see that coming, or I should have been able to, but I didn't. I didn't guess that. So I tried to write the book so that ideally both kinds of pleasures would exist for a reader depending on what kind of reader it was. What about you, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I have this theory, and this is completely plucked out of thin air, but I have this theory that if you're seeding your reveals right, then about 10% of readers are gonna guess it.
Yes.
And that 10% of readers might be mad because they're like, it was obvious to me. And it's like, well, if it was obvious to truly no one, if 100% of people didn't get it, then you did something wrong as an author, that it wasn't properly seeded. So, and not to mention the fact that like books are contained worlds. Like it would not be satisfying if the answer to the puzzle was like somebody you've never heard of, like just wandered in and did the murder, and you just find it on the last page, and that's very disappointing. So we're within this contained world. We have a cast of characters, and so just statistically, yes, some people are going to correctly guess something about that. So I mean, the question specifically was, do you want readers to be able to figure out the puzzle, or do you want a final resolution to come as a head spinning surprise? I don't know. I feel like both, all of the above. I want it to feel surprising, but earned and satisfying and inevitable. And it's really hard because like we, the writers, we only get one, you know, we're pantsers. So we only get like one clean clean right through where things are actually surprising. And then it gets really hard to gauge, like, is this too obvious or is this too subtle? Because we know, which is where writing groups are really, really, really key. But I don't know. I don't have a great answer either. I think both. But great question. I'm going to keep thinking on that one, and I'd be curious to hear what your answer is, Chris. But yeah, I think at this point we are going to turn it back over to the Strand. But thank you again so much, Marie, for asking me to do this. I loved this book. Everyone, please order this book. You do yourself a favor, get it for everyone you know.
And these books.
Oh,
yes, I am trying to like I need more hands. We also need these books.
Oh, thank you.
I'd just like to echo those thanks. Marie, it was such a pleasure to host you tonight. Andrea, thank you so much for moderating tonight's event. To our audience, thank you for joining us tonight. If you'd like to purchase a copy of Real Easy, which is signed, I dropped a link in the chat. We also have copies of We Were Never Here, and there are links also dropped in the chat. And on that note, thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a fantastic evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone.
Thanks so much.